Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to our series here. This month, we are celebrating Native American Heritage Month, and coinciding with that, BJC is using this time to bring our series, Voices of Native American Faith Freedom. And this morning, I am honored and happy to have my friend, former BJC board chair, Reverend Mitch Randall from Good Faith Media, executive officer there. Mitch, good morning.
Good morning, Charles. On behalf of everybody here at Good Faith Media, we are honored to be a part of this incredible series and always enjoy our time in partnership with BJC.
All right, thank you for that. Thank you for that. So, Mitch, we'll get right into it here. I want you to kind of describe your family history here in America, and also help us understand a little bit more about your tribe.
Sure. Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk about my ancestry and heritage. For those who do not know me, I am Muscogee Creek. I am I'm a citizen of the Muscogee Creek Nation, which is a sovereign nation. I live in Oklahoma, live in the central part of Oklahoma now, but I grew up on the eastern side of the state. And tradition Oklahoma was split into two territories. There was Oklahoma Territory in the west and Indian Territory, as they called it, in the east. And those territories originally in Oklahoma Territory were split among the tribes after a period of time I'll mention here in just a moment. But the Muscogee Creek Nation is part of Tulsa and Okmulgee, the southern part of Tulsa County. So that kind of gives you a little idea in location state-wise where I grew up and where my family ended up. But they didn't always live there, Charles. In fact, believe it or not, Native Americans, especially Muscogee Creeks, that I call my tribe, we didn't choose that part of the world to live in. It was chosen for us because our ancestral lands are in the southeast. If you look at history, the Muscogee Creeks lived in what is present day northeast Alabama, northwest Georgia, and the southern part of Tennessee. That was our ancestral lands. We had lived there for centuries upon centuries among the other tribes of North America. We were part of this symbiotic humanity that existed with one another. We had unique traditions and cultures among the tribes. Yes, there were skirmishes among the tribes, but for the whole Native Americans, indigenous peoples of North America and Central America lived pretty harmoniously, believe it or not. And then something happened in the year 1492 that changed everything for the indigenous people. And of course, that was when Columbus landed in the Caribbean islands. And after Columbus, people began to flood into North America from places like Europe. And so once that occurred, my people remained in that area. Those are my ancestral lands until 1830. And in 1830, President Andrew Jackson passed the Indian Removal Act. And it was at that time, one of the most atrocious periods of our country's history occurred, and that was the Trail of Tears. And the tribes of the Southeast, Muscogee Creeks being one of them, as well as the Cherokee, began a march on foot across the South into Oklahoma, where there was land allotted to my family. So I can trace my family right up to that point in about 1889 to 1910, because that's when my family was forced to register their names in the Dawes rolls. And so once they made that trek across the South on the Trail of Tears, with, mind you, thousands of them dying in the dead of winter, those who did make it, my family, one of them, had to register in Indian Territory in the Dawes rolls, and that's where we first see my family heritage, the McIntosh and Childers clans of the Creek tribe, show up officially in government records. Up to that point, there were no written records of my family, but at that point, we're able to trace my family back to those Dawes rolls, and they resided in a little town called Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, just outside of Tulsa. Again, part of the Childress and McIntosh clans of the Creek tribe, and that heritage has been passed down to me and my brother, and now I'm passing it on to my two sons, and he's passing it on to his children as well.
Wow. You know, Mitch, we had our questions that we were going to ask here. We had sort of order to them, but hearing you only made me think of some things. Two things I want to say before I go into this next question. It is sad what happened and what occurred, but I think we're also living in a time where it's sad that people would want to rewrite that history and not have it to be as blatant and as wrong as it was. We have textbooks that no longer say the Trail of Tears. They want to say voluntarily moved to the southwest from Georgia. But also one of the things that I found that was so interesting, we talked about Christopher Columbus and we talked about your tribe there in Georgia. But Andrew Jackson also wrote some things and said, you know, I thought I was down here fighting Indians, but it looks like I've been fighting inwards as well, because the tribes and stuff was, he said the people they were fighting to get there looked so much like African Americans as well. And so it's such a crazy thing to think that those cultures are linked like that. And then you end up outside of Tulsa, and of course people should know about the Tulsa riots, and just so much intertwined connection between people that have suffered here, but still have survived. And so it kind of makes me just jump to this question of what does that manifest destiny mean to a Native American Christian? And, you know, the story of it, and the Trail of Tears, everything, the good and bad of what it kind of means to still claim Christianity and claim, you know, your Native American heritage, but also understand the idea of manifest destiny.
Well, thank you, Charles, for that question. And it's an excellent question that certainly needs to be addressed. Let me respond to some of your early comments. The indigenous story of North America parallels very well with the African story and descendants of slaves here in America. We have to be honest about our history. Growing up in Tulsa, two things that I did not learn, even as a Native American. One was the deep betrayal of the United States government when it came to indigenous peoples and the treaties that were signed and broken. I was told to be proud about my heritage, which I certainly was, but for some reason, the education that I received never told me the full story of what transpired there. There's a misnomer, Charles, that for some reason to understand the full history of our people, the full history of our country, that being that America was simply founded, and there's no way to get around this, the genocide of Native Americans, indigenous people, and the enslavement of Africans. That's how the United States of America was built. That's the foundation it poured on. The false dichotomy that is there is that it does not make this country any less great. In fact, if we can be honest about our origins, if we can come to grips about those evils that haunt us as a country, then it will make us a better country to understand that history and to embrace it and say never, ever again, especially when it comes to genocide and the enslavement and the injustices that we have seen throughout our history. So, you know, our two stories, the indigenous story and the African story, parallel very well, but it all begins with this concept of doctrine of discovery that eventually leads into manifest destiny. Doctrine of discovery was a 12th century European idea. You can see it in papal bulls that were issued around that period. And that simply states, because the church is ordained by God, that as they set out on mission, as they go out into the world to convert the world to Christianity, any lands that they discover, any peoples that they discover, any peoples that they conquer in battle becomes that of God's kingdom, which is an extension of, at that period, Rome and the Roman Catholic Church. And so we see that all throughout Europe in the following centuries, after the 12th centuries, of the church exerting its power, whether it was through the church itself or through governments in Europe and monarchies through Europe. It exerted that power and influence through the idea of doctrine of discovery. Well, believe it or not, the doctrine of discovery did not end at the water's edge. In fact, Europeans brought that idea and concept into North America. And so when Columbus discovers, and I use air quotes on that, the North America in 1492, it's that mindset that is carried into this country. And so the encounters with the indigenous people were very confusing, especially for the Native Americans, because they didn't feel like they were discovered. They'd always lived here, but you had an entire people group come in and exert authority and power over them simply because they felt like they had a theological justification for taking the land and for subduing it as God intended, their viewpoint. Well, that doctrine of discovery led into the concept you mentioned a moment ago, and that's manifest destiny. Manifest destiny is simply the American ideal of the European ideal of doctrine of discovery. Manifest destiny states that the United States government is endorsed by God or called of God to expand the realm throughout North America. And it is a merger of church and state. It is using the power of the state and wielding the power of the state to subdue and conquer indigenous peoples in this country as Western expansionism continued after the 18th century, especially into the 19th century. And there's simply this idea that if I were a white, mainly Protestant, I could go into these indigenous lands and take them because God has ordained not only me to do so, but my government to do so. And what's really peculiar about this, Charles, is that in Western expansionism, even after the Louisiana Purchase, there was a purchase made by by America and France, but there were still indigenous people living on those lands. It was like, who decided that they owned these lands? Well, the Europeans did, even though Native Americans, indigenous people were still living there. So manifest destiny was used as a theological and political ideology to steal lands and conquer the indigenous people of North America. And unfortunately, Charles, I believe that the remnants of manifest destiny still exist today. That there are people who believe simply because of who they are, how they believe, how they vote, how much power and influence and wealth they have, that the laws do not matter for them. They can do as they will.
And can change them as they will.
Yes.
We talked about breaking of contracts. I mean, one of the biggest, gripes that the African Americans have is the breaking of the contract of the 40 acres and a mule, which was the giving of land that was supposed to be there, and it was supposed to happen. And in some ways it did, the transfer did happen, but some other powers came in to begin, and then those transfers were, null and void. And so this manifest destiny, both of us have a background of Christianity. And, sometimes it's a dueling background because of being in America and trying to balance those two things. So for you, how do you think your identity has informed your Christianity or your theology, or vice versa? How do you see those things informing each other? Has your identity informed your theology? Or has your theology pushed your identity? How would you describe it?
Well, let's first talk about identity, because I think that is a fascinating subject. Because when you talk about Native Americans, and when people find out that I'm a Native American, when they find out I'm Muscogee Creek, it's one of the first questions that I'm asked. And I would imagine you know what that question is. How much Indian are you?
Yes.
I don't know how to answer that question because it all has to deal with what is a concept called blood quantum. And blood quantum is an ancient idea of really, it's really a mechanism to discover how much white you are, to see if you're legitimate in the eyes of the questioner. And so blood quantum is really strange to me. Now, when Native Americans registered, when they came to Oklahoma after the Trail of Tears and they registered for the Dawes Rolls, they had to declare a blood quantum. And so what's interesting, if you were to look at my Indian degree of blood card, which I have, swear I have one of these things. If you were to look at it, technically, I am just shy of, and again, I don't know what this means, a quarter Native American. Well, the reason for that was that my great-great-grandfather, when he registered for the Dawes Rolls, he wanted to have a job. And the only way to get a job during that time period was to prove you had a little white in you. And so he put down and registered himself with having some Anglo heritage so that he could get a job. Now, the family tells the story, not only was it to get a job, but he also liked to play pool down at the pool hall. And to get into the pool hall, you had to prove you had a little white in you as well. But regardless, it's this sense of identity. People ask me, well, you're a quarter Native American. Well, that makes you 3/4 white. No, I am who I am. Mm-hmm. A number on a card does not indicate who I am or what I am. I am fully Native American, and I am fully Anglo through my maternal history. I've got an English background from Sheffield and Randall to my Macintosh and Childers Native American heritage. So I am who I am. It's my stories. It's my ancestral stories that make me the person that stands before you today. And that is very important. It's not a number on a card. It's the cultural narrative and the influence that I have gained through those stories. And I'll tell you one of those stories here in a second. But those stories have influenced my theology and my ideology more than you can ever imagine. And anybody who says otherwise is lying to you. Every one of our stories, every one of our histories and our ancestral narratives plays a part in producing not only our identity, but our convictions for today. Now, you know very well that I am passionate about the separation of church and state. Was even a former board director at the BJC many years ago. Well, reason for that passion is not only a theological conviction that I have understanding the Baptist history, but I have a personal story. My great-grandmother, Eloise Boutnot, who lived in Broken Arrow, it was her grandparents who came over on the Trail of Tears. But it was, as a child, she was born in Indian Territory. Well, back then, there was a process called the agricultural schools, and it was established by Henry Pratt, who was a former Army general. It's a weird story because General Pratt decided he got tired of killing Indians for President Jackson and decided there has to be a better way to interact with indigenous people. So his formula was to assimilate indigenous people into the white Protestant culture. And he felt the best way to do that was to establish boarding schools. So the first boarding school that he established was in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. The second one was in Chilocco, Oklahoma. My grandmother and her sister were residents of Chilocco. And the Pratt doctrine says this: to save the person, you must kill the Indian. Again, Pratt made that doctrine based upon the fact he got tired of physically killing Indians. So the assimilation was you had to kill every cultural nuance of the indigenous person in order to save the human being, which meant simply to make them a good white Protestant American citizen. So these two little girls left their home in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, traveled over 300 miles to Chilocco, which is near the Oklahoma-Kansas border. And there, one of the first things they encountered, their long black hair was cut. Their clothes were switched out from the soft leathers and fabrics and ribbons that they were used to wearing to a wool military type uniform. They were not allowed to speak Muscogee Creek. In fact, if they were caught speaking Muscogee Creek, they were whipped for speaking their native tongue. They were forced to speak English. They were forced to go to church. They could not miss. If they missed again, they would receive whippings. All of this was done through federal dollars, funded by federal monies, and it was run by Christian missionaries. And it is a tragic, tragic story. And again, it's a weird, strange story because Pratt really felt like he was doing good, but at the same time, you had a system that had physically committed genocide and killed Native Americans. Now those who were left, we had to finish them off. And the only way to do that, if we couldn't kill them any longer, we had to kill their culture. And that was the attempt. That's my family's history. I have relatives that were residents in these boarding schools. And because of that, I am a strong proponent of not only religious liberty, but the strict separation of church and state.
Oh, wow. These stories, one of the reasons I love doing these Voices series is what you learn, and how it's able to connect us and also be able to say, hey, this was wrong. Let's not do this again. Let's make sure that this is not a path. And it's why I'm a proponent of learning our history and, part of the critical race theory that comes into that, because you use the, what do you call it? The blood quantum.
Yeah, the blood quantum.
So in the African-American history, there's the one drop rule. If you had one drop of black blood, then you were black and you were ostracized for that. And so to see that blood quantum and then the one drop rule come out of how different human beings are being treated because of this is something that everybody should know. And you shouldn't whitewash that history in that. And so for us, I don't want to speak for you, but I think part of that is being able to handle our faith and know the history of some of the things that our faith tradition may have been used to do, but still on the other side of it come out and say, okay, I still believe in this, because just because you used it wrong doesn't mean the faith tradition is wrong. But for me, it also says, hey, I'm not going to take somebody else's faith tradition away, because just like you said, they try to take away your ancestors' identity and replace it with another identity. Many in the African American community, their gods, their spirituality was said to be evil and taken away and stripped away. And so I come to faith freedom for all, because I don't want that to happen to anybody. I don't want anybody to be taken away from them. So ideally, what would true faith freedom or Native American faith freedom look like for you in the future? If you could take it from here and say, here's faith freedom, not only for my tribe's community, but for everybody in America, what would that look like for you?
And Charles, I want to build off your comments because I think they're very important to get to that answer. And to build off of exactly what you said, what is very peculiar about the descendant of slave and indigenous stories is that Christianity was used to subjugate and oppress both of our peoples. But something happened in the milieu of all of that. African Americans and indigenous people were introduced to this Jewish rabbi from the Middle East. And I remember my family talking about this, that for some reason, what they were experiencing at the hands of Christians did not equate to the person they were reading about in the scripture. African Americans and indigenous people embraced Jesus. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no way to get around that. In this incredible system of oppression, where the Christianity was used as an oppressive tool, something happened in the mix, and African Americans and indigenous people fell in love with this Jewish rabbi and made this Jewish rabbi their Messiah. So what would the future look like? What would the perfect future look like for me? It would be a future where people do not have to deny their cultural identity. They do not have to deny who they are as a person in order to follow Jesus. Because this idea of Christianity, this broad concept of Christianity, has more to do with a belief system that has been established predominantly by white men. Let's be honest about that. But it's a system that has been produced based on belief. We've seen that for 500 years since the Reformation, and even beyond, but particularly about the Reformation. For 500 years, it's all been about what a person believes. And if they believe the right things, if they look a certain way, if they speak a certain way, then they can be truly called a believer. I am advocating that, just as the late, great Phyllis Tickle advocated for, that we are going, and when I say we, the church is going through a rummage sale, and that we are at that 500-year point right now where things can change and are changing. So what does it mean to have faith and freedom for all in the future? It means I can be who I am, who God created me to be, and I can go follow Jesus, and I can put Jesus' words into practice, into my life, which are simply his mantra: love God and love other people. No restrictions, no identifiers. I'm just called to love God and love other people. So we honor our history, we honor our culture, we do not deny who we are as a people, and we respect other people for who they are and their histories. And we move forward, and this is just as a Christian, because so understand that there are people who do not believe in Jesus, and I respect that as well. Mm-hmm. But let us honor one another, honor our histories, and move forward. And as people of faith, let's move forward following Jesus and respecting all the nuances and beauty that this world offers us.
Mitch, that's beautiful. And as you said at the end, that's for us Christians, but we want that for everybody else too.
Everybody else, yeah.
Everybody else in that. Be who you are, and know that there's love for you, not only from God as we feel it, but also it's love for you from each one of us, and that love is mutual, it's back and forth. And so, Mitch, man, we could talk about this all day, but I am so glad that you were able to join us to kick off the celebration of Native American Heritage Month and Indigenous People Heritage Month. We didn't talk about that as much, but we use those words interchangeably. But either way, we give respect on both sides of that. Whether it's Native American, Indigenous people, we give that respect on both sides. So thank you for joining us this week, and thank you for all your work with BJC all the time, and thank you for being a person that is for faith freedom for all.
Thank you, Charles. And let me end with a Muscogee saying. And it's a one-word saying. We are not a people that are very verbose. And so one word captures it all. And the word is medo, which simply means thank you in all of its nuances. It is an honor to be with you. It is a privilege to walk this world with you. So thank you for this time and all the work that BJC is doing. Medo, medo, medo.
Thank you. So one last business for people that are watching us today, our series is going to continue. Join us in 2 weeks where we have Mark Charles coming with us. That'll be actually on, I think the date is November 17th, Wednesday, November 17th. So be back with us on that day as I take the time to, first time I'll ever be able to interview a presidential candidate as a part of this. But we'll definitely be back for that. And check out all of our other Facebook Lives on our website, bjconline.org/Facebook Lives. I think it's FB Live on there. So I think it'll be put in the chat for you. So take time to look through all of these series. They're great, and the discussion guides that go along with them. So peace be unto you and everybody that is watching today. And thank you again, Mitch.
Thank you.